This is the final week of our Lenten study, Church Without Walls, and it's kind of a bringing it all together. One of the things that I am regularly telling my congregations when I'm preaching or groups when I meet with them is that Christianity at its core is not a religion. And they kind of wonder how that is true, because it's such the belief is such a constant in our society. But the thing is, Christianity wasn't set up to be a religion. It was set up to be a lifestyle. And that's a very different metric, a very different muscle in how we interact with the public. It was never designed to be in buildings and out of reach and be a system and series where people had to actually meet a particular benchmark. That's not the way the faith should have been. That is influences over the years. It's people putting their own understanding on how this should go. It's Greco-Roman society and European society and North American society managing Christianity and using it kind of like a symbol, as opposed to really getting back to what was in the Bible and how the early communities lived, but also shared. And this week we're looking. The scripture we're picking up is James. Now James was writing. This is a letter, and he was writing at about the third, fourth generation of early followers. So removed enough that the church had kind of been around for a while, but it hadn't yet gained the external structure of buildings and positions and hierarchies that we have come to learn. And one of the things he was really pointing out is that if you're a person of faith, you naturally act. These two are not incongruous. You see the world around you, you see God in other people, and you respond physically with generosity, with kindness, with tears, with whatever it is that the moment calls for. I've often been told that, or often I've heard people say that, "Oh well, I'm faithful, but I'm by myself. I don't need to be in a community." Well, yes and no. If your community is toxic, if it's not someplace that you're comfortable with, you absolutely should not be in that. There's no place for you, and you know that. But the community of believers is actually the world. You are surrounded all the time. And it's not a matter of saying, I'm Christian, therefore I will go out and tell everybody I'm doing this because I'm Christian. That's not how that's supposed to go. But as people who feel transformed, as people who understand that each person we meet is equally valuable to ourselves, people who are in need that I can help fix, I'm going to fix. That's a primal Christian value. And that is what Church Without Walls is all about. That's what the lifestyle is all about. It's an opportunity to live out the way Jesus lived and taught us to live and asked us to do. So, in essence, you are not isolated in your faith. You are just not in an institutional structure that dictates what that should look like and where the limitations are. Because really, if you are a citizen of the world and want social justice, there's no limits to that. That is what we should be about, and that's what we can be about as people of faith. So, this last week, we're kind of wrapping up everything we've looked at, because over the course of this Lenten series, we've looked at the mentorship process, education, how people develop their faith, how they learn about it. We've looked at gatherings, communal meals, where the history of the shared supper comes from, how we can incorporate it in our own lives. And we don't need someone who's ordained to be part of that. There was a reason they came in, but they can let go now. It doesn't have to be that it's only restricted to an institution. We have membership rituals. Once upon a time, those membership rituals were associated, and in some countries they still remain associated with legal identity and legal membership of the nation. That's not the case anymore. You can welcome people in without having to be in an institution to do it. We have work that has often been called charity. Last year's Lenten study, we watched how charity moved to social justice in the 1800s, early 1900s, because there was a new awareness. Charity is giving, but not necessarily questioning the status quo. Whereas social justice is very much about status quo and saying why this is wrong and why we have to fix it and doing something about it. So there, our very lives can do something fully faithful, fully in the gospel, and making a difference here in our modern experience. So as we go forward, we're bringing all of these together. So what can church without walls look like? Because it's not without structure, and this is something that can often be hard to kind of equate. That structure does not have to be institutional. Structure comes from tradition and history and interaction, and how was it done when what we take for granted just didn't exist? It thrived, it made a difference. So why can it not make that difference today that it used to make? Why do we have to essentially give up our sense of what Christian life can look like simply because of fading institutions that have a certain interpretation of what that should be? And institutions, by definition, are not risk takers. So anytime we want to change something, the institution's going to push back against that right away because it ruffles and it quakes and they can't handle it. But smaller groups, they've always lived this way. The early church has always pushed back. There's always ways we can do that. So we getting back into, I can be faithful by myself. I don't need to be part of a community. Yes and no. And I've explained the difference. So let's talk about community specifically, because in the handout, page 3, I think it is, there's a whole list of communities that I've provided for you, what they do, and where you can find out more information. See, one of the things about Church Without Walls is it's not new. People have been living without direct institutional control since the beginning, or limited institutional control. There have been times when the institution has kind of faded into the background and people have been far more organic about how they've lived, or that the institution has had tunnel vision on certain things and everybody else has been able to get away without having any kind of attention on them. One of the communities that historically that has always fascinated me is the Beguines. They were a group of primarily lay women, so women who came and went, who had jobs, who were living in community, who shared food, who shared resources. If they wanted to travel, they traveled. If they wanted to come back, they came back. If they wanted to marry, they left. If in widowhood or in their situation they had to leave that and come back into the community, they did. It was very fluid. It was very multi-generational, and it was a long lived experience of communal gathering of religious women who were not nuns. They were not in a convent. They were not being overseen by a rule. And rule, by the way, the definition of that is a written order of how to behave. And there are a number. I've referenced them in this list as well. There were a number of orders written by both men and women about how you should behave, how you should live within community in a monastic setting. But some of them also gave rules for people who didn't live in that monastic setting. So people who didn't take a vow of charity or poverty, or not charity, chastity rather, or poverty. And those links can be found in the page as well. It's known as the third or fourth order of any of these rules. So the first order, of course, would be how they live within community. The second order has its place, and I can't quite define that, so I'm not going to try. But the third and fourth order was just people living in society that really kind of gravitated to the core values of what the rule was supposed to be about, but didn't want to live the extreme life that they might have thought those in the first order did. So it was people in community. In fact, a number of years ago, this is how I first learned this was a thing. I was sitting at a gathering Germany, and talking with a man who was part of a fourth order of, I think, Benedictine or maybe Augustinian. I'm not quite sure what it was, but we had a fabulous conversation. And he lives his life. He was a businessman, married, children, doing his thing. But at the core of his being, he lived according to this rule that helped him with structure. Again, this is church without walls, the structure that helps kind of make a framework for how faith is lived. But it is not necessarily inside that community. And because of the internet, we have access to online communities that live this way, who see everything they do as part of their lived faith. It's not separated from in any ways. And that's something that's open to all of us. We don't have to go through institutional process to be able to live like that. But we have the benefit of the structure. And then there are a few other organizations that have just come together, kind of parachurch organizations almost. Some of the most famous ones, of course, there's L'Arche, there's Catholic Worker, there's some of the other names escape me, but it's in the handout. These are communities of believers who have come together for a specific purpose. So Catholic Worker, that was created by Dorothy Day, and early 1920s, I think, part of the social gospel era and messaging. And she saw poverty as a problem. So she created bread lines, and she created, or soup lines rather, and bread lines. She created opportunities for people to share housing. I had the opportunity to live actually in a Catholic worker community for a few months a number of years ago. And it's people who live and work together. The one I was in had several houses that some had families, some were single people, some had or mental issues or other mental challenges, physical challenges. They came together for meals. They lived their lives. Some of them had jobs. Some of them were part of a volunteer life, but they shared resources and they shared togetherness. And sometimes that actually meant living where every family had a room or a couple of rooms, and sometimes that was families had their own home, but they connected in and came when they needed to. So that was my experience of a Catholic worker. L'Arche, I've experienced secondhand. I had friends who used to live with that, and L'Arche is dedicated to working with people with intellectual challenges. Living in community, sharing support. Some actually worked for community. Some lived in the community and worked other lives. But they were opportunities for shared resources and joint experience, all grounded by their belief in Jesus' calling to care for each other, to be each other's salvation, which is what it really means. Salvation is not about an individual perfecting themselves. Salvation was always about the community kind of rising together, and once everybody was okay, then all of us individually were okay as well. It was very community focused. So these are some of the ways that we can live church without walls, but not without structure. And as I talked about in the beginning, the structure, when we do not have it, when we are not part of that thread that connects us to the past and goes into the future, those are not sustainable communities because they take a lot of present energy without rooting ourselves in tradition. And tradition doesn't have to be stifling. It's kind of like a scaffolding or a basement really that holds up the building. It's necessary. It kind of gives us context, but it doesn't hold us back from what is possible. So faith in community is not walking away. It's walking towards something. It is seeing how you can make a difference in the world. And the thing that's really cool about all of this is a lot of people come into this thinking my faith isn't strong enough to do this. But that's actually the reverse of how this works. Feeling the call of Jesus to do something, responding to that, grows faith. And then we're more open to the calling, and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. That's how this works. That's how community is part of the process. We cannot do this faith in isolation and get the full sense of the identity and the lifestyle. We can try, but it won't last. And it doesn't have to be an overt effort. It can just be as kind, just simple as kindness, being kind to people around you, being helpful, holding the door, picking up what dropped, seeing a need and kind of rushing forward to see and ask if they need something and be that for them. Every time we do this, our faith grows just that little bit much more because we know we are doing it, not just because we're good people. There's a lot of good people in the world, but we're doing it because God is acting through us, and that builds us up. When we get in community, when we get into that kind of bubble, almost safe space, that's when we talk about it with other people who are having the same experience. And that's another way of growing and experiencing what faith in our lives looks like. But it's the individual kind of getting out there in community and making a difference collectively, making a difference on our own, but actually integrate with God's people that is going to help us grow. So this entire journey, Church Without Walls, it is not about lopping off the past because we are incredibly rooted in the past. It is not about lopping off ritual because rituals make the community more solid. It is not about fantasy, it's never been done again, because it's being done everywhere. It's not about, I'm feeling very isolated, this world is not Christian. If you scratch the surface, it's still very much the values of Christ. We may call it the social safety network, but it's still the values of Christ. Feed people, house people, make sure they have medical attention. These are Christian values, that we should be providing all of this for each other without question. Being Church Without Walls is simply being in the community, in the world, as someone who God has called to make a difference. I hope this series has been helpful. There is much more on Barefoot Evangelist to have a look for. There's more coming. More opportunities to develop. There's one-on-one faith coaching with me if you're feeling that need. There is resources that I'm creating that are going to be populating both my website and my online store eventually. Opportunities to reach out and connect. Look at the list that I've sent you or that you've picked up through the workbooks. See what's there, because developing your faith is through action first. It's not like sitting there and suddenly you have enough faith, now you can go out and act. That's the opposite. You develop that faith by acting, by being with people who share this, by asking questions, basically engaging with the world. Your faith will come. And the old myth that faith is an invention, it's not real, society doesn't need it, I can tell you as an anthropologist, as a historian, it is one of the oldest expressions of community that exists, predating everything we have, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and Judaism, who were some of the earliest and oldest traditions on the earth. Faith, as the ancients understood, is as much of a person as breathing is. There is no disconnect there. We are all called to be people of faith. Christianity gives us a vision, community gives us opportunity, and all of it is about growth. And when we start doing that, when we start seeing the goodness that is being perpetuated, we realize institutions have their place, but they're not everything. Thank you for joining me.